order to make political capital.
Mr. Speaker, on the 10th of February, the Prime Minister from the dispatch box said there would be a world-leading battery plant in Bridgend. I think he meant in the Vale of Glamorgan. It's been moved to Blyth because of investment from the Tory government. The Secretary of State then decided to take to Twitter to praise the Prime Minister for announcing the mythical battery plant was going to be in Bridgend. Could the Secretary of State set out when he is delivering a world-leading battery plant for the Bridgend County Borough, or indeed for the neighbouring Vale of Glamorgan, or when he's going to get up and start bringing inward investment into the Bridgend Borough? It would all be very, very welcome, because my constituents deserve a lot better than what the Secretary of State is currently not delivering.
Well, thank you. I think the honourable gentleman's question was actually probably intended for the First Minister in Cardiff, but I'll do my best to answer it anyway. And as he well knows, Mr. Speaker, from the Prime Minister's statement, as indeed he well knows, there is considerable investment going to Wales. There are some really encouraging job prospects, particularly around gigafactories and the like, and he can shake his head as much as he likes, but the fact of the matter is, what he fails to grasp is the fact that there are very many millions and billions of pounds going into exactly this kind of technology improvements in Wales.
Let's go to Dr. Jamie Wallace. Jamie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bridgend has lost the Ford factory, and we didn't get the investment from INEOS that we were hoping for. But in order for Bridgend and the wider area to move forward, I think the town itself needs regeneration in order to increase the attractiveness of the overall area for investment. Can my right honourable friend outline what the government's doing to help towns such as Bridgend?
Absolutely, I can, Mr. Speaker, and I can start by reminding him, not that I would need to, that Bridgend is a priority one area for the Levelling Up Fund, potential access with his assistance for significant sums. Each local authority will get £125,000 of capacity funding to make those bids to the central fund, and I hope what he'll recognise there is that there is a real focus on exactly the kind of towns and areas that he represents as part of the Levelling Up project. That'll produce jobs and livelihoods in a way that has perhaps been difficult in the past.
The Secretary of State, Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Highly skilled workers in the aerospace industry across Wales, like those at AIM altitude, are now facing redundancy or even factory closure, as this sector is going to take years, not months, to recover. And yet, whilst overseas competitors are putting in the support to their companies so they can up production when the sector recovers, the UK government still has not brought forward a specific aerospace package some 12 months after the pandemic started. So is the Secretary of State just going to sit there and watch these industries fold? Or can he persuade his Cabinet colleagues to put in the long-term support that these high-value industries need?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable lady's comments are not reflected by large companies like Airbus, whose judgment I trust in these particular circumstances. And I simply repeat what I said in answer to an earlier question. UK government has provided £5.2 billion to Welsh government, £2.75 billion in business in work for business Wales, another £1.5 billion in bounce back loans, £500 million in CBILS loans. If that is not an indication of how committed we are to this particular sector, which I absolutely recognise is going through an especially difficult time, I don't know what is.
But, Mr. Speaker, if we're going to retain these industries and rebuild for the future, then we need a comprehensive UK-wide plan. But this government has just shelved its industrial strategy, scrapped its advisory council, and is now preparing to rip up its industrial policy. So when will the Secretary of State and his Cabinet colleagues develop a forward-looking, far-reaching UK industrial policy which will build on our fantastic skill base to guarantee the new green jobs of the future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I disagree with the honourable lady's comments. What she's referred to are some process issues. We want to get sort of process and bureaucratic issues out of the way and actually deliver money and prospects and jobs and investments to the places which need them the most. That's what the government is committed to doing. It has widespread support from industry in that ambition. As I said in answer to an earlier question, only this morning there's a further £20 million been announced for the South Wales Industrial Cluster. Rather than talk about process and bodies and bureaucracy, we are actually doing real things.
Let's go to Alex Davies-Jones. Alex.
Diolch, Mr Speaker, and can I wish everybody celebrating a happy St Patrick's Day today. As my right honourable friend, the member for Llanelli, has just said, the Secretary of State will be more than aware of the complex challenges that coronavirus has presented to the aviation sector and the entire manufacturing supply chain. I hear what the Secretary of State says about Airbus, but sadly GE and BA in my constituency of Pontypridd have had to make significant staffing cuts. This is a sector crying out for financial support, but their pleas are falling on deaf ears. So will the Secretary of State therefore please update the House on his recent conversation specifically with the Chancellor on a sector-specific support package for Wales's aviation industry?
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. The Chancellor, I think, made it very clear how he's supporting every sector which has been so adversely affected by the coronavirus. In fact, I don't think there is a government in the world which has done as much in terms of financial support, either for this sector or indeed other sectors or individual families. That has been a huge credit to the Treasury and all of those who've been part of the team which has been able to do that. And the OBR forecasts for economic recovery next year and the year after are a testament to that and should benefit this sector just as much as it does everything else.
We now have a substantive question to the Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And with your permission, I will answer questions 16, 17 and 18 together. The Levelling Up Fund is unquestionably good news for Wales and will ensure that millions of pounds are invested into Welsh local authorities, providing much needed local infrastructure and driving up regeneration in left behind places.
Let's go to Simon Baines. Simon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Would the Minister meet with me and visit when possible exciting projects include South, which fulfil the requirements of the Levelling Up Fund, such as Wrexham Council's bold regeneration plans and the reopening of Corwin Station in Denbighshire on the Llangollen Steam Railway?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. May I assure the honourable gentleman that it's always a pleasure to meet with him and hear about the enormous amount of hard work that he is undertaking in his constituency. But unfortunately, I have been advised that it would not be appropriate for me to visit any specific project site. However, I of course look forward to supporting him and other members of Parliament that continue the work of using the funds being made available by the UK government to drive forward regeneration in their constituencies.
Let's go to Faye Jones. Faye.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was delighted to see so much in the budget for Brecon and Radnorshire. The Levelling Up Fund is extremely welcome, as is the commitment to the Global Centre for Rail Excellence in Colbrand in my constituency. But parts of Brecon and Radnor are plagued by substandard broadband and mobile coverage. Could the Minister confirm that the Levelling Up Fund will make a genuine difference to structural problems like this, which hold rural areas like mine back?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, we expect that the Levelling Up Fund can be used to invest in community infrastructure right the way across the board. And of course, the UK Gigabit programme will invest in broadband in the hardest to connect areas of the United Kingdom. And I'm also delighted, of course, I was delighted with the news of the Global Centre for Rail Excellence, something which my right honourable friend pushed very hard for, which is also going to be good news for the economy in that part of Wales.
Let's go to Beth Winter. Beth.
Diolch, Mr Speaker. Given that the Welsh Government has worked with Welsh local authorities and other stakeholders to produce a framework for regional investment, can the Minister tell the House why ministers at England's Department of Housing, with no history of delivering within Wales and no record of working with communities in Wales, or understanding the priorities that these communities have, are the right people to be administering this so-called Levelling Up Fund in Wales? Is this the result of this government's fixation with undermining democratic devolution?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think that's a rather disappointing question from the Honourable Lady. The Chancellor has made £800 million available for the devolved administrations across the United Kingdom and wants the UK government to be able to work directly with local authorities to hear about what their priorities are. I think it's absolutely fantastic that the Chancellor, as well as being able to deliver £800 million, has also found £740 million for the Welsh Government and has continued support for businesses and individuals in Wales affected by the COVID crisis. Perhaps I could pass on the Honourable Lady's congratulations to the Government for a fantastic budget for Wales.
19 is withdrawn, so I've got a substantive question to Secretary Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this month, the Chancellor committed £4.8 million to the Holyhead Hydrogen Hub project. Offshore wind in Wales is moving from strength to strength, with the potential for a 1.5 gigawatt project in North Wales and growing interest in floating wind off the South West Wales coast.
Let's go to Sarah Dine. Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Green issues affect the whole of this union. Does my right honourable friend agree that not only is it important that Wales capitalises on new and innovative green industries, but also that it continues to decarbonise the heavy industry that it already has, given that over 10 megatons of carbon emissions were generated by businesses and industries in Wales alone last year?
So state.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned in answer to an earlier question, only today there's been an announcement of a further £20 million for the South Wales Industrial Cluster. That's to develop an industrial decarbonisation plan. The 10-point plan and our net zero ambitions will create 250,000 jobs across the UK, and I'm absolutely determined to make sure Wales gets more than its fair share of those.
We have 21-22 withdrawn, so we have a substantive question to Secretary Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Cutting crime is an absolute priority for the UK government. We are working cross-government with local partners to address the drivers behind drug-related crime to help prevent further substance misuse and offending.
Let's go to Alexander Stafford. Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From the village of Wales in Rother Valley to the great country of Wales, drug usage, including that from nitrous oxide capsules, is a huge blight on our communities. What steps is he taking to ensure that the law is rigorously enforced and even tightened in regards to nitrous oxide to ensure that everyone, and particularly young people, are protected from this noxious substance?
Secretary of State.
Well, Speaker, my honourable friend makes an absolutely crucial approach, and I think it's worth pointing out at this stage how these awful crimes don't respect political or geographical borders. They are international problems, they're UK problems, and so one way of approaching this is to make sure UK police forces can collaborate in a cross-border and effective way, and that's what they're doing. He might have heard of Project Adder, the trial in Swansea Bay, and of course seen some of the benefits from the 2016 Psychoactive Substances Act.
Substantive question to the Secretary of State. 24.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have regular discussions with the First Minister of Wales and his ministerial team on a range of issues, including the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. The Government will continue to engage with Welsh Government as we develop the fund's investment framework, which will be published later this year.
Let's go to Wayne David. Wayne.
Can I ask the Minister whether or not the Shared Prosperity Fund will actually see resources allocated on the basis of need?
Secretary of State.
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. That's underpins the entire thrust of a number of these particular funds. That's why we're attempting to prioritise areas with greatest need, where there's opportunity and challenges, so that we can get the money to the right place at the right time as fast as we can. And one of the reasons that one of the bits of feedback we get from local communities is that there seems to be a lot of money talked about, but it never quite gets to the right place. What this new initiative provides is a much quicker and better way involving local authorities to get over that particular problem.
Let's go to Anthony Thinking.
Question 25, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On top of the new UK-wide funds, £4.8 million has been committed to the Holyhead Hydrogen Hub. I'll get it right eventually, up to £30 million to the Global Centre of Rail Excellence, and we're accelerating funding for the growth deals in Wales.
Thank you. In North Wales, just as in Burnley, there is a strong and proud aerospace manufacturing sector. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the Chancellor's super deduction announced at the budget could be transformational for that sector, allowing it to invest in equipment and machinery that will create jobs and boost productivity?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, he doesn't have to take it from me. He makes a very good point, and I have to tell him from the number of stakeholder engagements we've had in the Wales office, including that sector, the reception to this particular recommendation has been absolutely fantastic. It's transformational. This is the first time this has ever been done. Probably the biggest tax cut in history. That's the sort of thing which will regenerate jobs and livelihoods at a time when they're most needed, and I congratulate the Chancellor for his efforts.
Well, congratulations to the Welsh team. We've finished the whole of Welsh questions. Right, let us move on to questions to the Prime Minister.
Where is he?
And we were going to start with Prime Minister's questions, and I'm going to call The Member of Parliament for Bury-in-Furness, Simon Fell. Simon Fell.
Number 1, sir.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure colleagues from across the House will want to join me in wishing everyone a very happy St Patrick's Day. I was delighted to visit Northern Ireland last week, where I was able to thank military and emergency response teams for their brilliant work throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Simon Fell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a decade ago, GSK announced a £350 million investment in my constituency, which would have led to 1,000 jobs. In 2017, they reneged on that, and a few weeks ago, they announced they were closing their business altogether. We've gone from the very real prospect of having 1,500 high-paying, high-skilled farmer jobs in my constituency to the risk of having none by 2025. Will my right honourable friend agree to meet with me and throw the weight of the government behind efforts to make sure that GSK does the right thing by my constituents and delivers for some very worried people?
Yes.
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend very much, and I want to express my deepest sympathy to all those in Ulverston affected by these job losses, and to say that I will certainly meet with him. I believe that bioscience is one of the great growth areas for this country in the future, and I am determined that Barrow and Furness should take part in that boom along with everywhere else, as well as other high technologies.
Right, let's come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about St Patrick's Day? My thoughts, and I'm sure those across the whole of the House, are with the family and friends of Sarah Everard, who will be suffering unspeakable grief. There are 5 words that will stick with us for a very long time. She was just walking home. Sometimes a tragedy is so shocking, it demands both justice and change. The Stephen Lawrence case showed the poison of structural and institutional racism. The James Bolger case made us question the nature of our society and the safety of our children. Now the awful events of the last week have lifted a veil on the epidemic of violence against women and girls. This must also be a watershed moment to change how we as a society treat women and girls and how we prevent and end sexual violence and harassment. I believe that if we work together, we can achieve that. And the questions I ask today are in that spirit. So first, does the Prime Minister agree that this must be a turning point in how we tackle violence against women and girls?
Mr. Speaker, yes, I do. And I associate myself fully with the remarks that the Right Honourable Gentleman has made about the appalling murder of Sarah Everard. And I'm sure that those emotions are shared in this House and around the country. And that event has triggered a reaction that I believe is wholly justified and understandable. And of course, we in government are doing everything that we can. We're investing in the Crown Prosecution Service, trying to speed up the law. We're changing the law on domestic violence and many, many other things. But I think that he is right, frankly, that unless and until we have a change in our culture that acknowledges and understands that women currently do not feel they are being heard, we will not fix this problem. And that is what we must do. We need a cultural and social change in attitudes to redress the balance, Mr. Speaker, and that is what I believe all politicians must now work together to achieve.
Keir Starmer.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for that answer? In that spirit, can I turn to the practical challenges we face if we are collectively to rise to this moment? The first challenge, Mr. Speaker, is that many, many women and girls feel unsafe on our streets, particularly at night. What's needed is legal protection. And that's why we've called for a specific new law on street harassment and also for toughening the law on stalking. Both, I think, are absolutely vital if we're going to make meaningful change in the everyday experiences of women and girls. So can the Prime Minister commit to take both of these measures forward?
Mr. Speaker, we're always happy to look at new proposals. what we're already doing is introducing tougher sanctions on stalkers, or that's already been brought in, and we're bringing in new measures to make the streets safer. Of course, that's the right thing to do, Mr. Speaker. Last night there was a bill before the House on police crime and sentencing, which did a lot to protect women and girls, which did a lot to protect women and girls, and it would have been good in a cross-party way, Mr. Speaker, to have had the support of the opposition.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I'll come to last night's bill later, but it did say a lot more about protecting statues than it did about protecting women. But let me, if I may, given the gravity of the situation, continue in the spirit so far. And I thank the Prime Minister for his answer. The next challenge, practical challenge, is that many, many women and girls who are subjected to sexual violence do not feel confident to come forward and report what has happened to them. 9 out of 10 don't do so. We have to improve the support that's provided for victims. The Victims Commissioner published a report last month with 32 recommendations about this. This week, Labour produced a detailed survivor support plan. And 5 years ago, I introduced a private member's bill with cross-party support for a victims law to give legally enforceable rights to victims. The Shadow Victims Minister, my honourable friend from Hove, has tabled a similar victims bill that's before Parliament now. It's ready to go. All it needs is political will to act. So will the Prime Minister commit now, not just to the idea of a victims law, which I think he does support, but to a tight timetable, ideally 6 months or so, to actually implement such a law?
Prime Minister.
As I say, Mr. Speaker, we're very happy to look at new proposals from all sides of the House on this issue, and that's why we're conducting an end-to-end review of the law on rape and how it works, and investing in the criminal justice system to speed up cases and give women and girls the confidence that they need. And I think that the point he makes about victims and their need to feel confident in coming forward is absolutely right, and that's why we've put £100 million so far into the services for dealing with violence against women and girls, particularly independent domestic violence advisors, independent sexual violence advisors, Mr. Speaker. I don't pretend that these are the entire solution. They are part of the solution, but it is also vital, Mr. Speaker, that we have long-term cultural, societal change to deal with this issue.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I agree with the Prime Minister on that last point. Can I gently remind him that for 10 years this government has been promising a victims law? I think it's been in his party's last 3 manifestos. It still hasn't materialised. We don't, Prime Minister, need more reviews, consultation strategies. The conversations our Shadow Minister is having with government, constructive conversations, are exactly the same conversations as I had 5 years ago, constructive conversations. We just need now to get on with it. But let me press on with the practical challenges, because the next challenge is this, that for many, many women and girls who do come forward to report sexual violence, no criminal charges are brought. Only 1.5% of rapes reported to the police lead to a prosecution. Put the other way, 98.5% of reported rapes don't lead to a prosecution. That's a shocking statistic. I do appreciate that efforts are being made to improve the situation. But can the Prime Minister tell us what is he going to do about this, not in a few years' time, not next year, but now?
Prime Minister.
He's entirely right, Mr. Speaker, in the sense that I agree with him. One of the first things I said when I became Prime Minister was that I believed that the prosecution rates for rape were a disgrace in this country, and we need to sort it out. And yes, that's why we're investing in confidence-building measures such as ISVAs and IDVAs, and investing in the CPS, and trying to speed up the process of the law to give people the confidence their cases will be heard in due time. But we're also doing what we can to toughen the penalties for those men, and I'm afraid it is overwhelmingly men, who commit these crimes. And I think it would have been a good thing if last night the whole House could have voted for tougher sentences for those who commit sexual and violence offences and stop stop people, Mr. Speaker, from being released early. And in that collegiate spirit, I would ask him to work together with us.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I was Director of Public Prosecution for 5 years and spent every day prosecuting serious crime, including terrorism, sexual violence and rape. So I really don't need lectures about how to enforce the criminal law. But walking on through the system, as many women and girls have to do, and facing up to the challenges that we need to face up to as a house, the next challenge is the point the Prime Minister just referenced, and that's the sentences for rape and sexual violence, because they need to be toughened. Let me give the House 3 examples. John Patrick, convicted of raping a 13-year-old girl, he received a 7-year sentence. Orlando and Constanzo, convicted of raping a woman in a nightclub, they received a 7.5-year sentence. James Reeve, convicted of raping a 7-year-old girl, he received a 9-year sentence. Does the Prime Minister agree we need urgently to look at this and to toughen sentences for rape and serious sexual violence?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if there was a bill going through the House of Commons which did exactly that? Wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if there were measures to defend women and girls from violent and sex criminals? Wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if there was a bill before the House to have tougher sentences for child murderers and tougher punishments for sex offenders? That, I think, would be a fine thing, Mr. Speaker. As it happens, there is such a bill before the House. I think it would be a great thing if the right honourable gentleman actually had voted for it. He still has time. This bill is still before the House. He can lift his opposition. They actually voted against it, Mr. Speaker, on a 3-line whip, and I think it was crazy.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, he mentions the bill last night. That provided for longer maximum sentences for damaging a memorial than the sentences imposed in the 3 cases of rape I've referred the House to. All of those sentences less than 10 years. Yep. I thank the Prime Minister for providing me with the best examples of why the priorities in his bill were so wrong. And nothing in that bill would have increased the length of sentence in any of those rape cases. Nothing in that bill. But let me try to return to the constructive spirit, because I think that is demanded of all of us. If this House came together on the points raised today, and there's been agreement across the dispatch boxes, it would make a real difference to victims of crime. This week, Labour published a 10-point plan. We published a victims' law. In coming days, we're going to publish amendments in relation to the criminal justice system to make it work better. Now, I don't expect the Prime Minister to agree with all of this, and frankly, I don't care if this becomes a government bill or Conservative legislation. All I care about is whether we make progress. So will the Prime Minister meet me, the Shadow Home Secretary, the Honourable Member for Birmingham Yardley and victims groups who've spent many years campaigning on this, so that we can really and truly make this a turning point?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid that he does, and I'm grateful to him for the collegiate speech, the way in which he's addressing this, and the way in which he's reaching out across the chamber. And I think that's entirely right in the circumstances. But I do think that he should not misrepresent what the bill was trying to do. The average sentence for rape is already 9 years, 9 months, as he knows full well. The maximum sentence is already life. What we were trying to do is stiffen the sentences for a variety of offences to protect women and girls and others. And that is entirely the right thing to do, Mr. Speaker. And we will go on with our agenda, delivering on the people's priorities, rolling out more police, 7,000 we have already, investing in ISVAs and IDVAs, and doing our utmost to accelerate the processes, the grinding processes of the criminal justice system, which, as he rightly says, are such a deterrent to women in coming forward to complain as they rightly should. But until we sort out that fundamental problem, until women feel that they are being heard and their voices are being heard and their complaints are being addressed by society, we will not fix this problem. And I warmly welcome what he suggests about wanting to fix it together, and I hope that in that spirit he can bring himself to vote for the tougher sentences that we've set out.
just to say, we've got to be a little bit careful because nobody would misrepresent each other in this House. Steve Double.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for bringing the G7 Leaders Summit to Cornwall this summer? This will put Cornwall front and centre of the world stage as we emerge from the pandemic and give us a great opportunity to showcase all that Cornwall has to offer, not just as a great place to visit and our amazing food and drink sector, but in the technologies of the future in space and renewable energy. I know the Prime Minister shares my ambition that the G7 will leave a lasting economic legacy for the people of Cornwall. So to that end, and in light of the recent progress made on lithium extraction, would he work with me to secure a gigafactory for Cornwall so that we can produce the batteries, leave that lasting economic legacy and provide the well-paid jobs for the future that Cornwall needs?
Yes.
Prime Minister.
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker. I think Cornwall is the Klondike of lithium, as far as I understand the matter, and I'll be delighted to assist him in locating a gigafactory somewhere near Cornwall, Mr. Speaker. But I don't want to promise too much at this stage.
Let's go to the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I wish everyone a happy St. Patrick's Day. Mr. Speaker, for people across Scotland, this week again exposed a tale of two governments with two very different sets of values. Yesterday, the SNP government passed landmark legislation that will put the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scots law, putting children at the vanguard of children's rights. In contrast, we have a UK government that has to be shamed into providing free school meals, that will clap for nurses but won't give them a fair wage, and ploughs billions into a nuclear arsenal that sits redundant on the Clyde. Does the Prime Minister understand that the Scottish people are best served with a government that lives up to their values? A government, Prime Minister, that prioritises bairns, not bombs.
Prime Minister.
I think what the people of Scotland need and deserve, Mr. Speaker, is a government that tackles the problems of education in Scotland, that addresses itself to fighting crime and drug addiction in Scotland, and a government in Scotland that weans itself off its addiction to constitutional change and constitutional argument, and it seems determined to call in the middle of a pandemic when the country is trying to move forward together, seems determined and obsessed with nothing else, Mr. Speaker, nothing else than breaking up the country and a reckless referendum.
Ian Blackford. Ian.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Of course, this is Prime Minister's questions. The Prime Minister, maybe just once, might start to try and answer a question that's put to him, because we're talking about a Tory plan to impose a 40% increase in nuclear warheads. Our children have the right to a future that no longer lives under the shadow of these weapons of mass destruction. As the Irish President said on this St. Patrick's Day, surely we need to find ways to make peace, not war. Every single one of these weapons will be based on the Clyde. So can the Prime Minister tell us exactly when the Scottish people gave him the moral or democratic authority to impose these weapons of mass destruction on our soil in Scotland?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the people of Scotland contribute enormously to the health, happiness, well-being and security of this entire country, not least through their contribution to our science, our defences, our international aid and many, many other ways. And I'm very proud that this government is investing record sums in defence, including maintaining our nuclear defence, which is absolutely vital for our long-term security, and helping thereby to drive jobs not just in Scotland but across the whole of the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back in July last year, I informed the Prime Minister of the need for a new hospital in Doncaster. Sadly, Doncaster was not mentioned in the first 40 hospitals promised in the manifesto, but the building of a further 8 specialist hospitals was. Yet does my right honourable friend agree with me that a new hospital will prove to the people of Doncaster that this government is committed to building back better and levelling up their town?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is a fantastic advocate of Doncaster, and he's right to campaign in the way that he does. I wish I could give him a cut and dried yes or no answer today, but I can tell him that his local trust is very much in the running in the current open competition for the next 8 hospitals on top of the 40, Mr. Speaker, that we're already building.
Let's go to Caroline Lucas. Caroline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The creation of a no protest zone around Parliament, a 266% increase from a maximum 3 months to 11 months imprisonment for protest organisers, a direct attack on the Gypsy, Roma and traveller community, up to 10 years in prison for any offence committed by destroying or damaging a memorial, and criminalising people for taking part in protests where they ought to have known police conditions were in place. Would the Prime Minister agree that if the UK is to be a force for good, in a world where democracy is in retreat, as his Foreign Secretary is saying today, it needs to start at home with the protection of the long-standing, precious and fundamental right to peaceful protest that is a cornerstone of liberal democracy?
Prime Minister.
She is quite right to stick up for peaceful protest, and I understand that, and I sympathise with that. But there are a couple of points. First of all, we're facing a pandemic, Mr. Speaker, in which we have to restrict, alas, we have to restrict human contact, and although she shakes her head, I think that the people of this country do understand that. They do understand the restrictions that we're now under. And I think we also have to strike a balance between the need to allow peaceful protest to go ahead, and we do, on a huge scale in this country, but also to protect free speech, Mr. Speaker, and vital parts of the UK economy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I also want to see the fundamental right to protest protected. So events such as that powerful vigil last Saturday on Clapham Common can proceed safely, including COVID safe. But I also want to see measures so people can go about their lives, get to work, get to hospital without being hindered. So can the Prime Minister reassure me that that police and crime bill, which we've been discussing today and was in the House yesterday, does strike that balance, whilst also taking action against the perpetrators of some of the worst crimes?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend has perfectly summed up the balance that we're trying to strike between allowing people in a reasonable way to go about their daily lives, but also bringing in tougher sentences for child murderers, tougher punishments for sex offenders, and stopping the practice, the continual practice of allowing people out early, Mr. Speaker. I think that's what the people of this country want to see. That's what they voted for in 2019, and I hope that the opposition can bring themselves one day to support it.
Charlotte Nettles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the government's end-to-end rape review remaining unpublished 2 years after it was promised, rape conviction rates having fallen to their lowest point on record, and almost 90% of sexual harassment complaints not even reported to the police, women are increasingly being left without legal recourse for sexual violence. I have parliamentary privilege. I can name the men who have hurt me. But millions of women in this country don't even have that. Stuck between a criminal system where only 1.4% of reported offences result in charges being laid, and where too many survivors who speak out are pursued through the civil courts by their abusers to silence them, can the Prime Minister advise how women are meant to get justice?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid that she's completely right, and I know that she speaks for many people, many women up and down the country. And what we need to do, we can do all the things that we've talked about, 2 men arguing over the dispatch box. We can do all those things. We can bring in more laws, tougher sentences, which I hope she will support. We can support independent domestic violence and sexual violence advisors, all that kind of thing. But we have to address the fundamental issue of the casual, everyday sexism and apathy that fails to address the concerns of women. That is the underlying issue.
Let's go to Fiona Bruce. Fiona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 years ago, the Bishop of Truro produced an interim report outlining the global phenomenon of persecution of Christians. As we make progress in our manifesto commitment to fully implement the Truro Review recommendations, does the Prime Minister join me in looking forward to our hosting the International Ministerial Conference on Freedom of Religion or Belief next year, and to the UK demonstrating its global leadership in defending and promoting this universal right for all?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend very much for everything that she's doing to campaign for freedom of religion and belief, and I'm very pleased that we're going to be holding an international conference on this issue. That is exactly what Global Britain is all about. It's about promoting freedom of expression, freedom of belief and religion.
Let's go to Peter Graham. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister refused point blank to answer the question from my right honourable friend from Ross Skye and Lochaber. So I'll ask him again. What is it that gives any British Prime Minister the moral and democratic right to impose the obscenity of an even bigger arsenal of weapons of mass murder on the people of Scotland against their express will?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think that was a veiled attempt again by the SNP to ask for another referendum, which is their habitual refrain. That is all they seem able to talk about. Democratic wrangling about democracy and their desire to be separated and to break up the country. I don't think that's the right way forward. I think we need strong defences. That's what the people of this country voted for, and that's what we're going to deliver.
Let's go to Steve Bride. Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From gloom to joy, and news from the Winchester for the Prime Minister is that the vaccination programme is going really, really well. There are now less than 200,000 people in the whole of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight left to do in cohorts 1 to 9. And we have the plan plus the supply to cover them comfortably by the end of March. So would my right honourable friend please thank the NHS and its volunteers here for this amazing effort. And as he does that, could he share with us his view on what led to the disinformation and apparent abandonment of scientific evidence in certain EU member states around the Oxford AstraZeneca jab?
Prime Minister.
I want to, of course, I thank the NHS in Hampshire and indeed around the country for the amazing job that they're doing in rolling out the vaccination programme. It's been truly stunning, and I think perhaps the best thing I can say about the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine programme is that I finally got news that I'm going to have my own jab, Mr. Speaker, very, very shortly. I'm pleased to discover I don't know whether the right honourable gentleman's had his. He's had his, but it will certainly be Oxford AstraZeneca that I will be having.
Let's go to Geraint Davies. Geraint.
Mr. Speaker, there's now been over 600 cases of coronavirus infections at DVLA Swansea since September. Yet ministers still refuse to meet with the PCS union to discuss ways in which more workers can work from home in safety before they're vaccinated. So workers have now resorted to voting for strike action as a last resort to protect their families and communities. So I ask the Prime Minister again, will he now instruct ministers to engage in talks with the union to help shield vulnerable workers before vaccination, or will he force a needless strike?
Prime Minister.
Well, I think needless is the right word, Mr. Speaker, and I think he should bear in mind that any strike is likely to be bad news for motorists. We're at the stage now where we want to have advancing down our roadmap out of lockdown, and at the DVLA, any staff who can work from home are doing so. And currently, out of a workforce of 6,000, only 5 cases of COVID have currently been found, and I understand that those individuals are all working from home. So frankly, Mr. Speaker, I see no need for industrial action.
Listening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My Kensington constituents and I have been deeply troubled by what is coming out of the Grenfell inquiry with regard to the building products industry. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that contractors who have behaved improperly should not be used going forward for government contracts? And will my right honourable friend consider a tax on the building products industry in the same way as we've done on the residential property sector as a way for partly paying for cladding remediation?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and I know how much she cares about this issue and how deeply her constituents have been affected by the Grenfell fire. And what I can say to her, I will study her proposal for a new tax on building materials, and I know my right honourable friend the Chancellor will want to think about that kind of idea. But we are looking at new rules to exclude contractors from government business where gross professional negligence has been shown, Mr. Speaker.
Let's go to Richard Bergen. Richard.
Exactly 1 year ago today, we were told that 20,000 coronavirus deaths would be, and I quote, a good outcome. Yet our death toll is now 6 times higher. Over 100,000 more people have lost their lives than that initial estimate. In March last year, the Prime Minister pontificated about taking it on the chin. Others acted decisively with lockdowns. But the Prime Minister dithered and delayed with deadly consequences. With the worst hopefully now behind us, isn't it time for the Prime Minister to hold up his hands and come clean with the British public and say, those deaths are on me, and for that, I apologise?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I certainly take full responsibility for everything the government did, and of course we mourn the loss of every single coronavirus victim, and we sympathise deeply with their families and their loved ones. And am I sorry for what has happened to our country? Yes, of course, I'm deeply sorry, Mr. Speaker. And of course, there will be time for a full inquiry to enable us all to understand what we need to do better when we face these problems in the future. And that is something I think the whole House shares.
Let's go to Dr. Neil Hudson. Neil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 5 years on from Storm Desmond and a year on from Storm Ciara, sadly, Penrith and the Border and Cumbria remain in the front line for severe flooding events. With climate change, these catastrophes are becoming increasingly frequent and severe, and the effects on communities are serious and long-term. Can my right honourable friend reassure my constituents that at-risk communities will be supported by government, both in terms of flood protection, but also with the longer-term support, including in the important area of help for the mental health impacts of flooding?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend makes a really good point about the mental health impacts of flooding. Anybody who goes to, or who's been a victim of flooding, or who visits a family that's been hit by flooding will know the immense distress that flooding causes, and that's why the NHS will get an extra £500 million to address those issues and to give more support for the mental health needs that people have.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, in December 2019's election campaign, you visited Samantha Parker at her home in Darlington. Samantha has the rare genetic condition PKU. You vowed to do your utmost to get her access to the life-changing drug Kuvan on the NHS.
Use you, I'm not responsible. Thank you.
Apologies. Prime Minister vowed to do his utmost to get her access to the life-changing drug Kuvan. Last month, NICE published draft guidance which would make Kuvan available to children, but not to adults like Samantha. Great for children, but devastating and discriminatory for adults like Samantha. Prime Minister, speaking as chair of the APPG on PKU, I now ask, what action will you take to deliver on your commitment to Samantha Parker and make Kuvan available for her and for other adults with PKU?
Prime Minister.
I thank her very much for raising the case, which I well remember. I'm glad that NICE has now extended the treatment's availability to children with PKU. Clearly we need to do more, and I will be very happy to take it up.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has my right honourable friend noted that the integrated review has been widely and rightly welcomed as a bold British vision for our role in the world? At the same time, but not in Scotland, of course, where the Nationalist administration thinks it's more important to put IndyRef 2 on the ballot paper at the Scottish elections. Does he realise that they are rejecting the jobs and security that his review guarantees in Scotland, because they hate the UK more than they want jobs for their own people?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for his support for the integrated review. I think that it's hard to know what motivates our friends in the Scottish National Party, but I do think that they're mistaken in their approach to this. I think that we're better as one United Kingdom. I think that we're stronger together as one United Kingdom, and I think the contribution of the people of Scotland to the defence of our United Kingdom is absolutely incredible and has been for centuries, and that's what I want to maintain, and I think it's a fine thing, and they should champion it.
Let's go to Tahir Halley. Tahir. Tahir Halley.
Throughout the last year, NHS staff have been working tirelessly to keep our communities healthy and safe during the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the Prime Minister, why has he been economical with the truth when he says that a 1% pay increase is all the government can afford?
Can I just say no honourable member on any side would actually mislead or lie to the House, but I'm sure the Prime Minister could answer something.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I'm grateful for your clarification, because what we're doing is we're saying that we so value the incredible contribution of nurses to our country over the last year or more, that we want them, exceptionally of all the public services, to be looked at for a pay increase at a time of real difficulty in the public finances, which I think people do understand. Now, that's on top of the 12.8% increase in starting salary for nurses, plus the £5,000 bursary and the £3,000 that we've given for special help for childcare and other training needs, and which actually are leading, if he looks at the figures, they're leading to a big increase in the number of nurses in the NHS, 10,600 more this year than last year, more nurses in the NHS, and 60,000 more in training. And when I talk to nurses, what they want, of course everybody wants better pay and conditions, I totally understand that, but what they also want is an extra pair of hands next to them to give them the help and reassurance they need, and that's what we're recruiting.
Nikki.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recent horrific events have brought the important debate on women and girls' rights into the spotlight, and specifically their right to be safe and feel safe as they go about their daily lives. Does my right honourable friend agree that such issues need to be treated sensitively? And false claims made by the Labour Party last night on social media about the police crime sentencing and courts bill are misleading and certainly not helpful.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it was certainly a mistake, and a regrettable mistake, for anybody to suggest that rape had been decriminalised in this country, because we must do everything we can to reassure victims of rape and sexual violence and get them to come forward, and that is what we're doing. And I also think it would be a good thing if together we could vote for some of the tougher sentences that we put forward in this bill. And I like the collegiate spirit that we had earlier on. I hope it can be extended to voting for the tougher sentences that we put forward.
Final question, Gerald Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today, the Welsh Labour Government have announced a special bonus payment for NHS and social care staff in Wales, with the Welsh Government covering the basic tax and national insurance payments so that most people will receive around £500. Will the Prime Minister today join me in welcoming this payment in recognition of the dedication and commitment of our NHS and social care staff?
Prime Minister.
I thank him, and I do indeed recognise the amazing dedication and commitment of NHS and social care staff who have been at the forefront of this pandemic, who have borne the brunt of it in many cases personally in their lives. And that's why I just repeat the point that I made a while ago about what we're doing to recognise the contribution of nurses in particular, alone of all the public sector in these very, very difficult times, and to say how relieved and glad I am to see the number of nurses who are now in training. I think there's a 34% increase in applications to be nurses this year in the country. That's great, but we're going to drive it forward, Mr. Speaker. We want to go, as you know, we have a target of 50,000 more nurses as well as 20,000 more police.
I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable the necessary arrangements for the next business. Order.